students and professors of Reddit. What moment made you want to rage quit college? Got a failing score on a lab report even though me and the rest of the group thought we did everything in the rubric. We went to our TA's office hours later to ask about the score. She basically reversed all subtracted points because she was taking off points for things we had done correctly. The next year one of my lab mates got a grading position with that TA. She admitted to him that halfway through the year she stopped paying attention to the reports and assigned random scores. WTF, this is a college level course for our major. You can't do that. Usually when you take any kind of math oriented exam, math, physics, mechanics, etc., you get a pack of problems slapped on your desk and you finish it in the time allotted. So you can generally blow through 90% of a test and get stuck on one difficult part for the remainder, or just have that aha moment at the end to squeeze in a few extra points. But this one guy had the bright idea of handing out and collecting each problem at 15 minutes intervals. So once the problem was collected, that was it. Even if you figured out the mistake earlier, it was already too late. Hate the prof to this day. I cannot for the life of me figure out what the prof was trying to accomplish by doing that. I had to write an essay about my feelings studying abroad for reflection. So obviously I made the whole essay, then had to resubmit it because that is not how you should be feeling. She misspelled my name in the email. Still makes me really mad. Had an English prof who told me that my personal experience essay about my second boyfriend committing suicide was obviously fake. When my supervisor decided that I needed to completely rewrite my master's thesis for publication to an angle that was complete nonsense and unpublishable. First day in a particular finance class senior year. Professor, who here is taking other classes? Pretty much everybody raises a hand. Professor, who here has a job? Most of the class raises a hand. Professor, well, that's a mistake because this class will take you at least 50 hours a week just to pass. I thought he was just trying to be a hard ass, but then the guy behind me confirmed that the class would indeed take that much time per week every week just to get by because it was his third time taking the class, and he was otherwise an A student. Sorry, I have bills to pay, other classes, and other responsibilities. The time does not exist to put that much time into this class. So I did rage quit after trying desperately to get through the class for a couple of months. I'd have asked him what he thinks is the reason he's incapable of teaching this subject as efficiently as most other professors, then dropped the class. During grad school, my research advisor asked me to help out another fellow grad student in their research as both of our researches have a lot of experimental parallels. Anyway, I spent good bit of 2 months of summer helping that colleague in her experiments and data, and then my RA told me that I couldn't use any of the data that I freaking helped create. Not only did I lose months of my precious time, but also I got no benefit other than my name being mentioned in a footnote on my colleague's paper. The time that both my TI-83 Plus and my TI-89 died during a final exam. I missed a quiz due to a medical emergency and had the documentation of my visit and everything. I emailed my TA. Our quizzes were during discussion sections led by our TAs about making up the quiz. The TA told me to email the professor because it's his class policies. I emailed the professor, who then told me to email the TA because the TA is the one who administered the quiz. Shoulder CC'd them both and said, converse between yourselves and reply all with your answer. I was docked 10% of a final essay because I had the wrong date, so it wasn't following MLA standards. I put the date I submitted instead of the date it was due. I got a 90% on the paper. Miso is working on her master's right now, and a couple weeks ago, the professor added a freaking huge assignment that wasn't in the syllabus, and it wasn't even going to be graded. However, if they didn't do it, it was going to count against their participation grade. A few days ago, he announced that it was actually to try to teach them to stand up for themselves. He wanted the class to tell him the assignment was BS. They all failed this little test. Two major things really stick out. 1. I wrote an optics midterm feeling very confident in getting close to 100. Got my mark back and it was a 30%. I went to go check my exam and saw that the final grade was a 9/30. I looked through my exam and found only one mark wrong. Turns out the TA forgot to put the 2 in front of the 9 on the total mark page. 2. For a weekly assignment they took off 50% of your mark if you didn't include a separate cover page, even if you got perfect on the assignment. Oh, and they didn't tell us we needed one until after already submitting the first assignment. I was fairly confident about a final exam I had taken, but when I checked my grade it was a 56. I spoke to the professor and asked him to take a second look, but he refused and said it was obvious that I just hadn't put in the effort. I finally convinced him to recheck it, and it turned out that only one side of my answer sheet had been scanned. My actual grade was a 94. Thankfully he changed my grade to the correct score, but it was still frustrating. When we had to buy $400 textbooks when the previous edition could be bought second-hand for $50. The only difference between the two editions? The order of the practice problems at the end of each chapter. I did event management at uni a few years ago. Our lecturer brought in her 8-year-old daughter, who had been in a stage show once, to teach us about stage management. Almost all of the class didn't turn up to the next lecture in protest. Just recently bought a $300 loose leaf textbook for math. Now this isn't any higher level math, it's college algebra, something everyone at my school has to take. Of course it's written by my professor, of course it changes every year. Took it out of the shrink wrap and saw that the book was 150 pages. Leafed through it and saw that it is literally nothing. There's hardly any information, like 2 practice problems per topic and a glossary. The real information comes from a $100 access code that has more practice problems and actual information needed to complete the class. So now I'm out $300 on a freaking paperweight and $450 on one general education class. There's nothing that can be done at this point. I can't get a refund. All I can hope for is pawning it off to some unsuspecting student for likely less than half of what I paid for. Now I'm all angry again. Frick you, Professor J. I need to go lie down. The moment I got massive weekly group assignments that were only worth between 2-3%. We lost half the marks on one question because that page of the PDF submission was sideways. My advanced foreign language professor dictated that we could not speak English at all during the class, or we would have marks taken away. This was fine, until one day a girl started coughing up blood and we all stopped to make sure she was okay and help her out. Professor took marks off because we spoke in English. I'm still freaking angry. I tanked my GPA due to missing half a semester for a health issue. I was allowed to appeal to the dean and basically get my grades tossed. I rolled a bean out the tuition but my GPA would have survived. However, I had to have all my professors sign off that they agreed the appeal was justified. One professor refused to agree on the appeal and I wasn't allowed to turn it in. I once took a class called the Internet to fulfill a requirement. It taught you how to right-click, navigate to websites, and use search engines. This was in 2005. It was also an online course. I had a professor who had serious mental issues. This guy was just a raging maniac with the scariest explosive temper. The smallest things would set him off. For instance, this one girl had a bunch of papers stacked on her desk and he asked her what it was and she politely informed him that she was a T and they were tests that she was going to grade later. It's not like she was grading them in class. She was taking notes and being quiet. It just happened to be on her desk. He shouted at her to put it away. He would get angry when anyone asked any questions. He almost threw a chair at someone and yelled profanities. Everyone was scared of him. So myself and another student spoke to the dean under condition of anonymity since we were still in his class. The dean disclosed our names to him and our crazy prof started cold calling us and he gave me a B instead of an A even though I made an A on every test and quiz because my class participation was abysmal. Nobody wanted to speak in his class anyway. The whole thing was aggravating. There are people at the company I work for who have been fired for less. My brother is a college professor now and he says the world of academia has its share of arrogant egotistical pricks. I took a course called Companion Animals. No matter what I did I could not get less than 100% on anything. Missed a test, makeup at home, unsupervised, 100%. Final project completed in 15 minutes with a glow stick, poster board and Wikipedia, 100%. It was such a joke. Granted, I thought maybe by finishing the class I could have an animal familiar like a goat or something. Never happened though. I asked a question and the teacher ignored me. Minutes later, a different student asked the same question and the teacher said good question and answered it enthusiastically. You didn't phrase it with enough pizzazz. The IT situation at my undergrad was usually described as a lot of little fixes on an ancient set of software instead of upgrading. At some point, there was a comical little error where all campus services couldn't be accessed, but only from campus Wi-Fi. If you lived off campus, used mobile data, or could go somewhere off campus with Wi-Fi, you could get into campus services. But if you couldn't, very likely in a small town, probably only places with Wi-Fi were friends' houses, McDonald's, and Dunkin' Donuts, you were screwed. A professor got mad at us for not doing any online assignments because, well, then why aren't you contacting IT services yourselves and having them fix it? You know, like we could contact IT and everything would magically go back up and be fixed. Happened a couple times. Dropped out of college first time around, not because of grades, but was going through serious depression. Used the mounting debt and financial holds as an excuse. Went back to finish at age 27. Advisors told me I needed 38 credits to finish. Took 19 credits. Exactly courses advisors told me to take. That fall and then spring while working full time. Came back with a few weeks left in spring. They proceeded to tell me I had 25 credits remaining, despite the fact that 38 19 equals 19. I emailed several people up the chain for help. Nothing came of it. Wanted so badly to quit again. Instead, I took 19 summer credits and lots more debt, falling victim to one lazy professor who never checked the work we turned in online. Tried to fail me, claiming the work wasn't turned in. Complained to his superior. Proved my on-time submissions throughout the semester and got an A, but the original professor only relented when my assigned partner who did zero work throughout the semester went into his office and cried. He even had the audacity and call me to say, "You'd better thank your partner." Urged to quit rising, but I finished college. Background: there are 2 colleges in my town, one university and one community college. I chose community college because it was cheap. English 101. Write a 3-page creative piece on why you chose this community college. So, not knowing how to stretch its cheaper than university into 3 pages, I wrote about how I struggled with menial jobs my whole life and wanted a better future for me and my family. I was actually pretty proud of it. Classic overcoming hardship story. Teacher hands it back with a C. Says I didn't answer the question. I flipped. I circled the creative writing portion of the assignment sheet and stapled my graded paper to it and gave it to the department head and dean. The teacher was replaced mid-semester due to medical issues. I assume I wasn't the first one to complain about her. Frick her. All of my graded work added up to an A, but the professor gave me a C because she didn't like my attitude. I went to the dean to contest the grade. He told me that he couldn't do anything about it because I would have her as a professor in the future and didn't want to make things awkward. Instead, he gave me a CD of him playing Presbyterian hymns on the trumpet and sent me on my way. Wait, what? My freshman English professor emotionally harassed me, both in front of students and when everyone was gone. He failed every one of my assignments no matter how good they were. Actually, to be more of a dong, he graded them initially as A's or B's, but knocked off a bunch of points for no reason so they'd end up D's and F's. The worst part is, when I reported him to the dean with all the proof, every email, even fellow peers' testimonials, the dean told me, "Well, it seems like he's just picking on you, not harassing you." Harassment isn't the word I would use, more like bothersome. He just had twins, so that's probably why he's upset with you. Never had a more frustrating and heartbreaking experience. Good thing now I can't even remember his name. I had a newly hired lecturer who was not long out of university. He was extremely condescending to anyone he perceived to be below his intelligence level, and would try and crowbar the fact he had a PhD into any lesson or conversation he could. A few of us also had marks we considered suspect compared to his favorites. After a fair few disagreements with him, I dropped out, as did a couple others not long after. I'm still in contact with a couple people in the group. Turns out he was dismissed after the first year. Had to give a presentation for a class. There were going to be lots of graphs and stuff, so the professor made a point of saying that we should be careful with the colors we used, because if the graphs weren't legible he would deduct points. Spent hours agonizing over color choices, because why lose points for something stupid like that? Load the presentation on the projector, and the bulb was messed up or something, so reds, and by extension, every other color, weren't showing up properly. I was looking at my screen, so I had no idea. Professor gives me his comments, and grade, lost points for the graphs being hard to read. I failed an in-class math course the prior semester, so I took an online math course to make it up, which required us to do all of our studying, homework, and tests on some website that tracks your time. About 6 weeks in, I had done all of my work and was getting a C or B on most of the assignments. Well, I try and log into the site one day and it rejects me. After messaging the professor, he told me the class auto kicked me out because I hadn't spent enough hours on the site each week. Apparently I needed to put at least 15 hours a week on the site and I was only on for 6 hours. Well, frick me, sorry, I already knew most of the early material and didn't need to study for 5 hours. Using my math lab usually goes something like, incorrect, correct answer, 3x plus 5, your answer, 3x and 5. Frick all online homework software, it's glorified crap on a stick. When my lab tech told us that me and my lab partner could have the same data, but not the same graph. Was assigned a project to go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and to then write an essay on what it was like. Super weird, creepy invasion of privacy. We were supposed to either not say why we were there or to just pretend to be an alcoholic ex-alcoholic. My dad used to drink a lot and I took the assignment personally. Couldn't even look at it. A few students straight up refused to do it. I ended up giving my friend an 1/8 of weed to make up some BS essay for me. There was one sociology course that compelled students to stealthily attend and write reaction papers for either A. Funeral, B. AA meeting, C. Wedding. The point was to write about deviance and how people feel putting themselves in places where they do not belong. Some people went through worse and parted ways with even more weed than you. Freshman year I got salmonella from a bad batch of peanut butter. This was 2006. It was a pretty big story back then. I missed 2 weeks of class and couldn't get out of bed. Most of my professors were cool, but the head of the math department was a notorious B. I received a failing grade automatically for missing 6 classes. This was a huge problem, because it nearly cost me my full-time student status. After much begging through emails, I was able to schedule a meeting with her to discuss what happened and bring her a doctor's note. I showed up to her office for the meeting and there was a sign on the door saying she was out sick that day. My head nearly exploded. I had one professor who basically burned me out in computer science classes. First of all, he would check for plagiarism, comparing each student's assignment to each other, as well as all previous years to be sure we weren't working together. He took it a step further though. He also banned Stack Overflow and Google and would check against a lot of their code. The only resource we were allowed was his lectures. That wasn't even the bad part though. The bad part was his grading style. Every assignment was all or nothing. Either it worked correctly and within specifications or it was a 0%. Nothing in between. This also applied to tests and quizzes. His tests would be in the format of a single question with multiple parts. So really, multiple questions. The slightest error would mark the whole question wrong, resulting in a 0 on the test. Sometimes the tests were simple things like writing out the code for 4 different sort algorithms on paper. And yes, if there were any errors on the handwritten paper it was wrong. I once failed a test for missing a semicolon. Sometimes he would get creative. Our midterm in our OS1 class was a 20-page paper in 6 points font with nothing but rows of zeros and ones for a parity test. For those who don't know, parity is basically a method of detecting errors in computer code. You add up the numbers in a row or column to get even odd and compare it to the final value to see if it matches. So 01110 is 3, so the parity bit is a 1. If it matches you're good. If the parity bit is a 0, you know that row has an error. Anyways, these tests each had a single parity error in them and it was a take-home test. The professor got really sneaky though. Anticipating that each student would try and work with others, he made every single test unique. Then, assuming that we would try and write a script to find the error, he made sure to use a non-machine readable font. This test was 15% of our final grade. In another class with this guy, He made us write our assignments in a different programming language every single week. Obviously, with no instruction on the language, it was just assumed as part of the assignment that we would figure out how to do it. You have been visited by the science doggo. Upvote now and you will get high grades and good results within the next week. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.